This is The Mad Monarchist with the politically incorrect truth about the French Revolution, Part 3. The Revolution itself. The French Revolution can be summed up in 3 words: unnecessary, unjust, and unforgivable. It was unnecessary because of what we've already talked about, what King Louis XVI was doing. They didn't need to go to these lengths to establish political change in the country, to effect political change. King Louis XVI was already decentralizing power, he was already allowing representative assemblies, and he even went along with France becoming a constitutional monarchy, which is something that is often overlooked. Peaceful change was possible. Peaceful change was happening. It was only because of the ideological fanatics who refused to accept the legal process and who always wanted more, that it turned violent. They decided to use violence to get their way. It didn't have to be that way. It was completely unnecessary. And you can see that in the way the voting went, how the people on the radical left, this is where left and right comes from, every time they would get what they wanted. They would get what they wanted, the moderates would give in to them, they would get what they wanted, and then they'd demand more. They would get that, and then they would demand more. Until the whole political dialogue just kept moving farther and farther to the left, farther and farther to the radical fringe, until it ended up in complete chaos with the revolution and the reign of terror. It was not necessary for that to happen. They didn't have to be that demanding. They didn't have to be that uncompromising. They didn't have to resort to force and butchering their political enemies. And anyone who thinks it was necessary, you don't have to look very far to find out that is not true. Perfect example, not too far away, is the Kingdom of Denmark. Kingdom of Denmark is the oldest monarchy in Europe. They have the same monarchy now they've always had. Denmark never had a revolution. And you can look at Denmark and France today, and people in Denmark are not more oppressed than the French. They're not any less free than the French. And yet they got where they are today without having a revolution, without having a huge bloodbath, without massacring people, without murdering their king and queen and royal family. And there are plenty of other examples you could point to. It was not necessary. It was unjust because of who supported it and why they supported it. Because all the defenders of the French Revolution say it was all about the people. They were fighting for the people. They were trying to liberate the people against the horrible, wicked upper class. And yet it wasn't for the people, because it was the ordinary people who suffered more than anyone else. It was the ordinary people who were most of the people who were killed. Everyone has the idea that it was only aristocrats that were hauled off to the guillotine. They were a tiny minority. They knew how to survive. In fact, many of them survived by getting in front of the revolution. All of the people that they point to the aristocracy, and there was plenty of corruption in the aristocracy. People who were living lavish lifestyles, who were not taking care of the people as they should have been, and who were adopting all of the latest liberal ideas and trends and fashionable political ideologies. Well, they had enough sense when they saw the revolution coming to get out in front of it. They joined the revolution. The revolutionary ranks were filled with aristocrats. And there were even clergy who supported it. They even came up with a name for it, the treason of the clergy. Because so many of them had become corrupt, so many of them had forgotten what Christianity and what the Catholic Church was supposed to be all about, and they joined the revolution. And the areas where this did not happen, there was no revolution. In fact, there was opposition to the revolution, such as the most famous example everyone knows is the Vendée. In the Vendée, the nobles did not abandon their people, and the clergy were not corrupt, and there they opposed the revolution, and they all joined together to resist it. And what did they get for their effort? They got massacred. They got wiped out by the infernal columns because they wouldn't go along with the revolution. So much for liberty for them. And that also shows how the revolution was unjust. because it meant less freedom, not more. It meant more oppression, not less. Because you could be, as any of the leaders of the French Revolution were living examples, you could be a liberal Enlightenment philosophe and sit in your salon, talk about with your friends all the newest ideas about republicanism and different political ideas, and people like Voltaire and Rousseau. You could talk about all of that. That all existed in France, and no one ever harmed them for it. And yet, after the revolution broke out, you didn't have that same freedom. You couldn't talk about monarchy. You couldn't talk about the traditional monarchy. You couldn't talk about Catholicism, or they'd take you off and have your head chopped off. It was less freedom, not more. Also, because there was no more law and order, you couldn't even trust your own neighbors. Any neighbor, for any reason, who had a grudge against you could just accuse you of being a royalist or a counter-revolutionary or even simply a moderate Republican, and again, they would have you hauled off and beheaded. France did not become a more free society because of the revolution. It became a society of oppression, of fear, and of massive violence. Now, it's unforgivable because the ends in no way justified the means. And yet you hear many people still saying this today. You hear many people say, well, it was a pretty bad thing. You know, lots of bad things happened in the Reign of Terror, and that wasn't so great. But, you know, in the end, it was necessary because they had to get rid of that horrible kingdom of France. No. There is no way you can justify the horrendous butchery that accompanied the French Revolution. And the true extent of it will probably never be known. But there were nearly 100,000 people killed in the Reign of Terror alone, just around Paris. Many, many more throughout the whole countryside of France. And then, of course, because these were ideological fanatics, it wasn't enough that they had their revolutionary republic in France. No, they had to expand, they had to export their idea, they had to take down every other monarchy in Europe, or any republic that opposed them too, because they went after republics as well. And if you include all of that, there were millions of people killed in the French Revolutionary Wars. You can't say that was justified. There is absolutely no way any sane person could say that was justified. And they set a precedent for violent change. They set a precedent for a tiny minority of people, a bunch of fanatical ideologues, being able to change the government by force. The Kingdom of France existed for almost 1,000 years. And yet since the Revolution, they've restored the traditional Kingdom of France. They had the traditional monarchy came back. They had a popular monarchy. They had 2 empires. And they're currently on their 5th republic. And almost none of them ended peacefully. And there was never a legal process to any of this. There was never any kind of mass uprising or anything. It was always the same thing. It was a small faction, sometimes more, sometimes less, but a minority of radical people who decided to use force to get what they want, because thanks to the French Revolution, they knew they could get away with it, they knew they could be effective. They set a precedent for violent change, and not just in France, but around the world. And there were bloodbaths all around the world, from Germany to Russia to China, all these different places who got their inspiration from the French Revolution. And you have to remember, for those people who still defend the revolution, that in itself makes it unforgivable. It's pretty hard to forgive someone who doesn't ask for forgiveness, who thinks there is nothing they should be forgiven for. And yet these people defend the revolution that killed hundreds of thousands, even millions of innocent people. In France, think of all the millions of people who died, and they defend that. How can anyone forgive that? And we're not just talking about the clergy, we're not even talking about the aristocrats, not even talking about people who had actual power, like the king. Truly innocent people. Innocent commoners who were wrongfully accused. What did they ever do wrong? Or even high-born people, say the little Dauphin. Who did he ever hurt? What did he ever do wrong that would justify him being beaten and starved to death? Truly innocent people, wiped out by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, eventually by the millions all across Europe. It is not defensible. It is not forgivable. And that's the politically incorrect truth about the French Revolution. Take care.
We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?